The hospital reverend remained in the vinyl visitor chair, observing the rapid tapping of Kira's fingers. "If the nocturnal loops are persistent," he suggested gently, his voice maintaining a slow, even rhythm, "perhaps you would benefit from a waking recalibration. We have a guided meditation session starting down the hall. It is a quiet, highly controlled environment designed to lower internal pressure." Kira processed the variables. "I will join the meditation session," she confirmed, calculating the odds. "If it accelerates the dissipation of the unauthorized data, it is a logical expenditure of time." She followed the reverend down the corridor to a room lined with soft mats. The instructor directed the patients to assume a comfortable posture. Kira lay flat on her back, ensuring her spine formed a perfectly straight line. She followed the breathing cadence, mathematically counting the seconds. Slowly, the defensive tension in her muscles unspooled. She reached a state of total physical relaxation, her sensory intake dropping to near zero. Then, the sensory vacuum violently collapsed. The quiet room vanished, replaced instantly by the overwhelming chlorine stench of a swimming pool. Kira was suddenly outside her own body, looking down at the damp, chaotic tiles with terrifying clarity. She saw herself thrashing frantically on the wet concrete, her features distorted in raw terror. Beside her writhing form was Jessie, his heavy winter layers soaked, his hands desperately trying to anchor her flailing limbs. The synthetic hallucinogen surged through her system all over again, the chemical breach replaying as an agonizing data loop. Kira's eyes snapped open. Her lungs hitched, starved for oxygen. Her spatial coordinates felt entirely compromised. She scrambled backward, her hands scraping harshly against the foam mats as she sought a defensible perimeter. Crawling frantically toward the far wall, her hazel eyes spotted a narrow wooden door. She yanked it open, threw herself inside the dark, confined space of a coat closet, and pulled the door tightly shut. She wedged herself beneath a row of winter jackets, curling into a defensive sphere. Outside the closet, the instructor called immediately for medical intervention. Within minutes, Dr. Evans approached the wooden door. "Kira," the doctor said, his voice muffled. "Your physiological metrics are safe. You are in the hospital. I need you to exit the closet so we can verify your baseline." Kira clamped her hands tightly over her ears, refusing to acknowledge the corrupted external variables. After several minutes of failed coaxing, Dr. Evans sighed, resigning to the hospital's strict non-force protocols. "Leave her in there for now. Her system is completely overloaded. She will be okay in there as long as she doesn't start scratching herself. Monitor the door." Miles away, Jessie finished his operational duties at Robin's diner. He navigated the freezing Manitoba wind to his car, focused entirely on returning to Kira. When he strode into the hospital's sterile lobby, he spotted Aunt Deborah pacing near the elevators. "Did you hold down the fort?" Deborah asked. "I did," Jessie replied, maintaining a standard tone for the median population. "But we have a problem. Bert was at the diner with his friends. He was loudly broadcasting his historical competition with Kira, treating it like a joke, and demanding to know what really happened with the police." Deborah's posture stiffened, her eyes narrowing furiously. "Bert needs to learn when to shut his mouth. I will talk to him today. If he jeopardizes her recovery with his unregulated ego, he will answer directly to me." Jessie bypassed the elevators and took the stairs to the telemetry ward. He pushed open the heavy wooden door to Kira's room, expecting to find her seated symmetrically on the mattress. The room was entirely empty. The digital clock blinked steadily, but the bed was vacant. Panic spiked sharply in his chest. He intercepted a passing nurse. "Where is Kira?" The nurse checked her clipboard. She had a severe setback during a guided meditation session. She barricaded herself in the meditation room's coat closet. Dr. Evans said to let her decompress, but she hasn't come out. Jessie navigated the sterile corridors until he reached the designated room. The instructor stood nervously near the wall, pointing silently to the closed closet door. Jessie knelt directly in front of the wood. He knocked twice, establishing a steady, predictable rhythm. "Kira," Jessie said, instantly dropping his voice into the precise, clinical cadence he reserved exclusively for her. "It is Jessie. I have completed my operational duties at the diner. I am currently holding position at your exterior perimeter. I am requesting authorization to open the door." A muffled voice replied, "Authorization granted." Jessie turned the knob and pulled the door open, allowing a rectangle of soft light to penetrate the darkness. Kira was curled tightly beneath a row of sterile coats, her oversized green sweater pulled down over her knees. "My attempt at recalibration was a catastrophic failure," Kira reported, her voice trembling. "The Reverend hypothesized that the nightmares would dissipate. He suggested I join the meditation session to lower my internal pressure. I calculated that it would help." Jessie remained perfectly still, keeping his physical form low. "What was the outcome?" "The moment my system completely relaxed, I lost my spatial anchor," Kira whispered. "I experienced a vivid visual playback. I was transported back to the swimming pool. I was observing myself and you. You were attempting to stabilize me during the chemical breach. The relaxation parameter is a severe hazard." Jessie reached into the dark closet, his movements heavily telegraphed, and placed his warm hand over her rapidly tapping fingers. The deep physical pressure provided an immediate, tangible anchor to the present timestamp. "Your architecture is not corrupted," Jessie stated firmly, maintaining his unbroken clinical rhythm. "You encountered a residual data loop. It was an involuntary processing error, not a permanent systemic flaw. Your baseline is actively repairing itself." He gently tugged her hands, inviting her to uncurl. Kira hesitated, then slowly crawled forward, crossing the threshold of the closet. The moment she was clear, Jessie wrapped his arms securely around her shoulders, pulling her into a rigid, deep-pressure embrace. "The sensory vacuum of meditation leaves you vulnerable to unprocessed historical data," Jessie explained softly. "The next time you attempt to meditate, we will adjust the parameters. Instead of clearing your processing center, we will consciously direct it. You can meditate on future variables." Kira sniffled, her rigid posture softening against his chest. "Which future variables?" "The acquisition of sweet egg sushi," Jessie replied smoothly, mapping out a perfectly structured horizon. "The exact dimensions of a symmetrical chocolate cake. We will flood the system with secure, predictable data until the hostile loops are permanently overwritten." The fluorescent lights of the telemetry ward hummed at a frequency of exactly 60 hertz, a constant auditory variable that Jessie had learned to tune out over the past week. He sat in the rigid vinyl chair beside Kira's mattress. The fluorescent lights of the telemetry ward hummed at a frequency of exactly 60 hertz, a constant auditory variable that Jessie had learned to tune out over the past week. He sat in the rigid vinyl chair beside Kira's mattress, his heavy winter boots resting squarely on the linoleum. Following the catastrophic failure of the meditation session, Kira had retreated into a tight, defensive posture, her hazel eyes fixed on the digital clock. Jessie knew she required a highly structured, forward-looking protocol to overwrite the lingering data loop of the chemical breach. "I am proposing an external transit operation," Jessie stated, his voice adopting the precise, clinical cadence he reserved strictly for her. "I have secured authorization for a temporary leave. We will travel to the cinema in Gimli. The environment offers a fixed 2-hour duration, forward-facing seating, and sequential visual data. It is a highly controlled narrative." Kira's fingers paused their frantic tapping against her denim jeans. She processed the proposed variables, her brow furrowing slightly as she calculated the sensory load. "A cinematic projection operates on a predictable timeline," she confirmed, her tone stabilizing. The darkness will reduce peripheral visual noise, and the social protocol mandates absolute silence from the median population. It is a logical expenditure of resources. I will prepare my external layers for transit. She stood up with mathematical precision and retreated into the attached washroom, pulling the wooden door shut with a solid click. Jessie stood and exhaled, rolling his shoulders to release the physical tension of his firewall duties. He stepped out of the room and into the sterile corridor. The ward was quiet, save for the squeak of rubber soles. He spotted Dr. Evans standing near the nursing station, updating a chart. Jessie approached him, dropping the rigid posture and shifting his vocal tone back to the standard rhythm of the median population. "Dr. Evans," Jessie said, keeping his voice respectful but firm. "I need to know the exact operational roadmap. What has to happen in order for Kira to finally come home? We need a clear path forward." The doctor closed the aluminum chart and sighed, turning to face Jessie. "The world out there is cruel, Jessie. It is highly unpredictable and rarely accommodates neurodivergent individuals without friction. In this ward, we control the lights, the sounds, and the social interactions. But out there, she needs to demonstrate robust coping skills. She has to be able to manage unexpected variables without retreating into a closet or experiencing a full system crash." Jessie nodded, absorbing the medical assessment. "She is building those skills. The movie today is a field test." "That is a good start," Dr. Evans agreed, pulling a small prescription pad from his white coat. "But the psychological aspect must be supported by correct biochemistry. The hallucinogen severely disrupted her neural pathways. To authorize a full discharge, she needs to be maintained on a very specific, carefully measured amount of citalopram to re-establish her daily baseline." Dr. Evans scribbled rapidly on the pad, the pen scratching loudly against the paper. "Additionally, she requires an emergency override. I am prescribing something fast-acting for the severe panic attacks. If a sensory spike threatens to cascade into a meltdown, this will act as a chemical break." He tore the 2 sheets from the pad and handed them to Jessie. Jessie took the slips of paper, folding them with exact symmetry before sliding them into the deep pocket of his winter coat. "I will go to the pharmacy and secure the inventory immediately," Jessie promised. Before Jessie could return to Kira's door, the heavy metal doors at the end of the corridor hissed open. Bert stepped onto the ward. Kira's older cousin looked entirely out of place in the sterile, high-security environment, wearing a bulky flannel shirt and carrying himself with a loud, clumsy momentum that immediately disrupted the quiet hallway. He looked nervously toward Kira's room, clearly intent on crossing the threshold. He did not make it past the nursing station. Aunt Deborah materialized from the visitor lounge with terrifying speed. She intercepted Bert with the precision of a heat-seeking missile, planting herself directly in his path and forcing him to halt. Her posture was rigid, her expression forged in absolute authority. "I just came to see her," Bert said, his voice carrying too much volume for the clinical setting. "I wanted to make peace with Kira, say I was sorry about how I acted at the diner." Deborah did not soften. She stepped closer, invading his personal space, forcing him to lower his volume. "You need to be incredibly careful about small towns and gossip, Bert. What you say about her, and how loudly you say it, has severe consequences." Bert shifted uncomfortably, looking down at his boots. "I was just venting to my buddies. I didn't think about small towns and gossip." "That is exactly the problem," Deborah hissed, her voice a sharp, contained reprimand. "You didn't think. This small town has been hungry for information on Kira since the night the sirens went off. Every neighbor, every customer at that diner, they are all looking for a crack in the narrative. Talking too loud in a public space is just as bad as actively spreading rumors. You handed them a megaphone." Bert swallowed hard, the reality of his acoustic leakage finally sinking in. "I didn't mean to compromise her." "Then prove it by keeping your mouth shut," Deborah ordered. You do not get to walk in here and dump your guilt on her while she is trying to rebuild her baseline. You can make peace when she is safely discharged and ready to process your apology. Jessie observed the successful interception with quiet approval. Aunt Deborah was proving to be a highly effective secondary firewall. Satisfied that the perimeter was secure, Jessie turned back to Kira's room just as the washroom door clicked open. Kira stepped out, having abandoned her standard structured clothing. Instead of her oversized green sweater, she was wearing a pair of loose gray sweatpants and a bright pink Hello Kitty shirt. The fabric was soft, completely devoid of restrictive seams or tags that could cause tactile friction during the 2-hour cinematic window. The vibrant pink character on her chest stood out sharply against the clinical white walls of the hospital. She walked toward Jessie, her movements fluid and purposeful. She adjusted the hem of the pink shirt, ensuring it fell symmetrically across her waist. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes clear and focused on the immediate objective. "My external protective layers are fully optimized," Kira stated smoothly, slipping her hand into his and gripping it with perfect, grounding pressure. "Let's go."